He had promised his best friend that he would become a monster hunter with her, but ended up becoming a monster instead. This manga story is about a 32-year-old man Kafka Hibino who is dissatisfied with his employment as a sweeper. He had wanted to join the defense force and work as a kaiju killer since he was a small boy. But after a few fruitless tries, he gave up on his aspirations and accepted the mediocrity that earned him a respectable salary. But when Lino Ikikawa, an enthusiastic 18-year-old recruit, joins his cleaning crew, Kafka is reminded of his desire to enlist. Once more, after a series of unlucky incidents and an encounter with the junior sweeper, Kafka comes across an unidentified flying kaiju that enters via his mouth and transforms him into Kaiju no 𝐂𝐸, a humanoid monster. Kafka aims to give his lifelong dream a final try. In Yokohama, a kaiju appears but is vanquished by the defense force. After that, the body is cleaned by Kafka Hibino's company. As they begin the cleaning, the supervisor notifies Kafka that a position had become available and moves him to the intestines. Kafka disagrees with it, but he is powerless. Kafka could still smell the guts in his bed that night. He notices on the TV that they are discussing Captain of the Defense Force's 3rd Division, Mina to her when they were younger. The following day at work, Kafka meets Lino Ikikawa, a new part-time employee who is attempting to enlist in the defense force. Lino is informed that Kafka attempted to enlist in the defense force but instead chose to work for them on a long-term basis. According to Kafka, he gave up as things got harder for him as he aged. Lino says he doesn't give up easily and finds such reasoning to be absurd. As they approach the kaiju, the manager assigns each team different tasks and places Lino on intestines, which causes Kafka to laugh. However, the manager also places Kafka on it because he is skilled at cleaning intestines. Both Kafka and Lino struggle to eat at lunch, and Kafka provides Lino vitamins and nose plugs to help him tolerate the odor. Following the workday, Lino thanks Kafka for aiding him and lets him know that the defense force has increased the maximum age to 33. However, Kafka is able to drive Lino away before he is eaten as a little creature named Yaju comes as he is leaving. While he grips the monster, he commands Lino to run and call for assistance. Kafka is once more brought back to his early years with Mina and their decision to enlist in the defense force to fight the kaiju. A short while later, the Yaju had quickly defeated Kafka and was about to devour him when Lino made his way back and attacked it with a sign. Lino explains that he sent the alarm and that he would be unable to join the defense forces if he fled. When Mina and the 3rd unit arrive, the Yaju is just ready to devour Lino when they destroy it with ease and then search the area for more Yaju creatures. Lino tells Kafka later at the Minami General Hospital that he would have died if he hadn't saved him and that he should really try out for the defense force. Kafka decides to try and accepts it, but then he notices a flying little monster above him. Before he could respond, the monster enters his mouth, claims to have discovered him, and turns Kafka into a kaiju. Lino and Kafka are both surprised, but an elderly guy notices them and sounds the alarm. They make the decision to flee after realizing Kafka would be slain. While taking a bath, Mina thinks back on how Kafka had lied about his intentions to stand by her side as she babbled kaiju. She agrees to send her squad after receiving a call about Kaiju's appearance at the hospital. Lino believes it to be Kafka and attempts to give the elderly man comfort by smiling, but the guy faints from the terror in his face. When Kafka touches the wall, he injures it severely, startling both him and Lino with the extent of his power. They decide to try to escape through the window, which Kafka shatters along with the wall as he tries to open it because of the noise. Kafka begins some strange change as they run, but as a mouth emerges from his mouth and consumes a crow, he reverts to his original monstrous shape. Kafka then remarks that he needs to urinate but is powerless to do so and begins gushing liquid from his nipples. Feeling ashamed, he then declares that he wants to die because he doesn't want to be anyone's bride. Then he understands that in this form, he could have a chance against the defense force, but Lino warns that they will shoot him dead on contact. After sensing something, Kafka believes it is a Yaju monster similar to the one from yesterday. Lino understands that because the defense force would be divided between them and the Yaju, this is their chance to go. In another scene, the Yaju is about to devour a child when Kafka shows up and punches it. The toddler is scared even more while the man tries to reassure him. As he decides to punch the Yaju with all of his strength, the Yaju explodes into bits, drenching the ground and blood, and Kafka orders Lino to take care of the infant. To help the girl not feel afraid, Kafka assures her that Lino would take both her and her mother to the hospital while he leaves. As the boy turns to thank him, Kafka is reminded of his commitment to Mina once more. As he tells Lino about his decision to continue applying for the Defense Force, he begins to change into a human. The Defense Force has been searching for the 8 documented kaiju this year for 3 months. This is the first kaiju they haven't been able to neutralize since the Defense Force's inception. Kafka and Lino Ikeikawa receive letters confirming their success on the Defense Force's initial inspection. Lino approaches Kafka, who is cleaning the premises, but notices that his head has been changed and begins yelling at him for exposing himself. Kafka corrects himself, saying he wasn't aware of it and that he occasionally changes when he isn't paying attention. Lino tells him he made it past the first hurdle, but he doesn't seem particularly ecstatic. Kafka explains that he frequently falls short of the second hurdle. Lino worries that he might turn unintentionally, but Kafka tells him that he can manage it, and at that same time, he morphs once more as he attempts to open a bottle. Lino, Kafka, and Defense Forces Takakawa base show up to the Nishi Tokyo testing site 10 days later for the second stage evaluation. As her lucky number for today is 5, and his car is sitting in the 55th parking spot, a girl calls Kafka old man and asks him to move it so she may park. In response to Kafka's perplexity, the girl chooses to move his car on her own, lifts the van with one arm, and tosses it to the side. Hikaru Shinomiya is the girl's name, and she identifies him as an examinee. She then asks Kafka why he smells like kaiju as she turns to face him. Lino Ikeikawa reveals that they work at a kaiju disposal company in response to Kikaru's question on why Kafka smells like kaiju. The van is then flipped back, shocking Kikaru by implying that he must possess a private suite, like she does. As he introduces himself, Kafka reminds Kikaru to remember his name. Kikaru says to Kafka that she came to the exam as a type of rite of passage, but that it seems like she may have some fun and that she will make a fool of him. Lino gets upset with Kafka for utilizing his abilities as Kikaru departs, and Kafka tries to explain that he only modified the things she couldn't see. The second level entails 2 tests, a fitness test and an aptitude test. According to Lino, they must perform well on the fitness exam because aptitude is an unpredictable variable that fluctuates every year. Kafka, who only just manages to keep up during the fitness test, finishes 219th out of 225 participants. Quickly approaching to poke fun of him is Kikaru. Lino is perplexed that Kafka didn't use his abilities. Kafka replies that it wouldn't be fair to the others if he did, but he quickly adds that he should have done so and now regrets it. Assuming Mina is solely concerned with murdering kaiju, Sashiro sends her the list of examinees, but when she sees Kafka's file, she decides to pay attention to him, which surprises him. Then Sashiro begins to discuss the notable candidates, and Lino also discusses them. They talk about how well prepared the top 3 in the fitness test, Haruichi Izumo, Iharu, Furuhashi, and Ai Kaguragi, are for it. Those and a select few others, says Lino, can be regarded as elites, but Kikaru stands out as the best of them all. She is observed by Haruichi, Iharu, and Ai as well. Kafka is surprised that she is a big thing when Kikaru approaches him again, but his butler promptly rebukes him for touching her. She admonishes him for acting like an idiot once more. The candidates then prepare for the aptitude test, and Lino remarks that over the previous 2 years, the aptitude test involved disposing of kaiju, which would increase understanding of kaiju body parts, which is why he joined Kafka's organization. Sashiro introduces himself as the vice captain of the 3rd Division at the entrance to the exam, and says the aptitude test will be neutralizing kaiju. Kafka is shocked when Sashiro discloses that the aptitude test is neutralizing kaiju. Sashiro says that each of them will receive a Defense Force suit, which contains kaiju muscle fibers and boosts their strength, so they won't just send them off like that. Lino unleashes 8% of his combat power after donning the outfit. Sashiro answers his question by saying that he is getting power from the suit, and a skilled general officer only receives around 20% of it. 46% is released by Kikaru, Ai Kaguragi 15%, Haruichi Izumo 18%, and Iharu Furuhashi 14%. The fact that there are so many above 10% surprises Sashiro and the others. Sashiro says they will pass if they are above 0% and that he has never seen someone with 0, but Kafka releases 0%, which makes Sashiro giggle. After describing how they had set up 36 Honju and Yaju monsters, Sashiro begins the test. A drone with automatic tracking will keep an eye on each examinee. They will activate the suit's shield if their life is in danger, however doing so will result in a failing grade. Sashiro mentions that Mina Ashiro will also be proctoring this final exam as they begin. If the test was simply to see how many kaiju you could kill, Kafka questions why they have drones that watch over each of them when sensors could have easily counted them. Kafka is aware that they are also evaluating their actions and adapting their skills. He determines they must act as backup because they are weak on offense. Kafka then encounters 𝐂𝐿𝐲𝐲 and, utilizing the knowledge gained from eliminating it, stuns it, using a paralyzed grenade while warning the other examinees that his stomach is weak and that they can shoot him there. The situation appears to be going well until 𝐂𝐿𝐲𝐲 suddenly arrives from the side and snatches 𝐂𝐿𝐲𝐲 attacks Kafka, injuring him, and as Sashiro raises his shield to protect him, 𝐾𝐽𝐻 arrives and kills 𝐂𝐿𝐲𝐲. She informs Kafka that no one is permitted to perish or leave her battlefield and that she plans to complete this exam right away. After that, 𝐾𝐽𝐻 keeps slaying Kaiju. Kafka receives a call from Sashiro advising him that he has several fractures and internal damage and advises dropping out, but Kafka gets up and says he wants to go on. Kafka asks Lino to carry him after Lino assures him that he will support him. Despite the strange looks and laughter they receive, they choose to pursue 𝐾𝐽𝐻 and offer assistance. 𝐾𝐽𝐻, who goes out and kills every 𝐂𝐲𝐲 before facing the Hanju, is the only one who can keep up, though. She tosses a grenade behind him, which causes it to open its lips before shooting it in the head to kill it. When the exam is declared over, Kafka is miffed that she actually finished quickly. Sashiro agrees with Mina that 𝐾𝐽𝐻 is strong, stating that although they had anticipated 30 dropouts, none occurred and there was only minor damage as a result of her presence. 𝐾𝐽𝐻 makes the decision to return and tease Kafka once more, but as she turns around, she notices a brand new kaiju behind her, which points a finger at her and pierces her chest. Kafka and Lino collapse to the ground in exhaustion. In spite of her repeated insults of him, Kafka declares his admiration for 𝐾𝐽𝐻 as this is happening. Lino is about to concur when the thought-to-be-defeated monsters regenerate, abruptly cutting him off. As a result of her wounds, 𝐾𝐽𝐻 finds it difficult to stand up after this and notices another kaiju speaking while doing so. As soon as it becomes aware of her, this kaiju intensifies her wounds as though employing invisible swords. Watching, Sashiro observes that this is not a characteristic of kaijus, and after learning that the kaiju was getting stronger as time went on, he comes to the conclusion that he and Mina were the only ones who could beat it alone. Then Mina exhorts Sashiro to kill the creature. Sashiro then orders the test subjects to leave. Despite her wounds, 𝐾𝐽𝐻 is enraged when she hears this since the monster might still be causing harm to other people when the members of the defense force arrive. She also recalls her father, expecting nothing less than immaculate behavior from his daughter. She tries to kill the kaiju because she wants her father's favor but is easily driven away. Immediately after, a flashback of her former classmates' amazement at her skill is revealed. As she had won her exam is shown. The child 𝐾𝐽𝐻 was pleased with her accomplishment and urged her father to know about it. He tells her to aim for perfection once more and expresses his displeasure with her joy because he had anticipated this from her. Returning to the present, 𝐾𝐽𝐻 thinks of her father's advice with each blow she delivers. The kaiju still regenerates in spite of her best attempts. Upon witnessing this, Sashiro, Konomi, and 𝐾𝐽𝐻 begin to lose faith, and 𝐾𝐽𝐻 even begins to apologize to her father in her thinking. As the kaiju is about to attack her while she is defenseless, it is quickly defeated. Kafka then appears in front of her and compliments her on her excellent work in continuing to weaken the kaiju. 𝐾𝐽𝐻 is perplexed as to how Kafka get there so soon despite the fact that she has just been saved. She receives no explanation from Kafka, who instead thanks her once again for her labor, before transforming into a kaiju. The remaining defense force members who had not engaged in combat earlier scramble to leave the examination area. Kafka learns that 𝐾𝐽𝐻 is still inside, trying to fight back as they make sure everyone is secure. Lino is undecided about what to do, but Kafka has left to help 𝐾𝐽𝐻 before he can make up his mind. At this point, he worries that Kafka may change, betray his identity, and be killed, but respects his friend's fortitude. 𝐾𝐽𝐻 is perplexed as Kafka changes into a kaiju, but Kafka asks her to keep this a secret. Before she can respond, the kaiju attacks, and 𝐾𝐽𝐻 is reassured by Kafka that all will become evident after he vanquishes the monster. Even though Konomi is unaware that it is him, she alerts Sashiro and Mina to a sudden jolt of electricity coming from where 𝐾𝐽𝐻 and Kafka are. Although Sashiro is perplexed by this as well, he makes the assumption that kaiju know it is to blame. Kafka tells the opposing kaiju himself as he thrusts him to the ground, "I try my best to battle my opponent, but I also try to do it as soon as possible in order to terminate things quickly." Then, as Kafka eliminates the kaiju, he attacks his opponent, nearly knocking 𝐾𝐽𝐻 out of the path. Despite the kaiju's ability to regenerate, Kafka is aware that its abilities will prevent him from recovering from the damage he has already sustained. Kafka's hypotheses turned out to be true because the kaiju tries to regenerate but is unable to. This kaiju unleashes an after beast, but Kafka quickly disposes of it. He then turns back into a human, grinning at 𝐾𝐸𝐿 while sternly warning her not to put herself in risk like this again. At this point, Lino locates Kafka and chastises him for disclosing his abilities. Kafka tries to reason with himself but is unsuccessful. 𝐾𝐸𝐿 notices this and is still perplexed, but she does not make an effort to explain since she is too worn out and passes out. Ashiro and Sashiro then show up at this point. At the scene of the kaiju attack, Sashiro and Mina show up. He investigates the region in an effort to comprehend what occurred, but he is still perplexed by what took place. He is then told that Lino, 𝐾𝐸𝐿, and Kafka have all just arrived at a nearby shelter for evacuation. He asks Mina what she thought of 𝐾𝐸𝐿 despite her strength as he surveys his surroundings. Sashiro makes the independent assumption that the attack of this kaiju and kaiju no, the 8th of May be related because they left identical footprints. Lino believes Kafka is fortunate to have suffered such minor injuries in the hospital, but also notes that 𝐾𝐸𝐿's status is stable. Introspectively, Kafka realizes how much more he could lose if he went too far, but that his passion can make him forget such things, and he praises Lino for being a good friend. They weren't aware that Mina had been listening in on their talk, which causes them to be startled when she suddenly walks in. Kafka hesitates to speak to her after finally joining the troop, but stops when she praises them for saving 𝐾𝐸𝐿. Kaiju no 9 can't believe Mina is that powerful after reading the news that evening and learning that the kaiju he had sent had killed no one. He soon receives a call telling him to get his act together, and he changes into a human to take on the role of a monster sweeper. His mask, though, occasionally falls apart. Kafka expresses gratitude to Lino for motivating him to finish his exams. When Kafka is anxious to learn his test results the next day, Lino is disproved in his belief that Kafka has improved his reliability. Kafka envisions himself and Mina fighting alongside one another in the defensive force as he prepares to open the letter containing his results. Soon after, Mina designates 𝐾𝐸𝐿 as an official member of the defense force. Despite her apparent pride in her accomplishment, 𝐾𝐸𝐿 is actually regretting the fact that Kafka was unable to pass the exam because he had protected her and that Mina had been applauding her. She was still perplexed, though, about Kafka being a kaiju. Kafka enters the room late and apologizes shyly shortly after this idea. Then, when she considers Kafka's results, Mina recalls the Defense Force conference where they had discussed the test takers. Although Kafka had low test scores, she was reluctant to fail him. However, before she could say it out loud, Hoshina cut her off and said that she was willing to accept Kafka because of his humorous personality, which Konomi chastises him for. When the conversation turned to the present, Mina said that she had Kafka skip the ceremony because he had been accepted as a cadet. 𝐈 is perplexed that Kafka passed the test after seeing this. Kafka and Mina exchange longing glances for one another. After that, Mina declares that there have been more hazardous kaijus appearing, and she trusts her new allies to support her in combat even if there is a chance they could perish. Then, stunning everyone in the area, Kafka addresses Mina by her first name and promises her that he would always be by her side. Then she hesitates to punish him for this because he becomes worried because he had forgotten that he had to address his childhood friend previously. Sashiro laughs at this and is taken aback when he notices Mina's smile. Then, Akinogi quietly informs Sashiro that it probably wasn't the best idea for him to have Kafka with him, but it soon becomes clear that Sashiro had other purposes for passing him. As Sashiro watches Kafka perform his push-ups, he recalls his theories about Kafka's potential connection to Kaiju no 8 and vows to find out more. Kafka and the others joined the defense force 2 months ago. Lino is honing his shooting techniques and it is discovered that he has increased his releasing force to 18%. As he does so, Sashiro is struck by Lino's quick development. Lino and Furuhashi both work out together, and Furuhashi is competing with Lino because he obtained a higher released force than him. However, 𝐾𝐸𝐿 defeats them both in just 1 second, using an unleashed force of 55% to take out all of the targets. She makes a sarcastic remark about her abilities to Lino and 𝐈, which makes them both angry. The competition between Haruichi and AI, who are both standing next to them, is evident when AI declares that he has finally caught up to Haruichi's troops. Despite this, Kafka is happy that his force increased from 0% to 1%, and is eager to share this with 𝐾𝐸𝐿, but she doesn't appear to give it much thought. Even though he may be proud of himself, Sashiro isn't afraid to remind him that with that amount of released force, he would likely be dismissed in less than 3 months. Despite this, Konomi and Sashiro are nevertheless pleased with their junior's performance. The men's group is taking a bath that evening. Even though Kafka is making an effort to unwind and talk to his friends about his anxieties, Lino and 𝐈's animosity is still evident. Despite Kafka's warning for them not to fight over things he considers pointless, the man laughs at him after noticing his muscles. Hearing their cries, AI becomes curious about what is happening. and when she sees Lino's muscles, 𝐂𝐒𝐻𝑒 and Lino's disagreements halt abruptly. Despite this, 𝐂𝐒𝐻𝑒 again sets the tone by inquiring as to why his close buddies decided to join the defense force. He then acknowledges that Mina had previously saved him and that ever since, he had appreciated both her and the others. The others are shocked when Kafka continues by explaining his own motivations and reveals that he and Mina were childhood friends, but they are still open to learning about her personal life. Soon after, Lino is the only member of the men's cohort who is not on the floor when Kikoru and Hakuya exit the bathroom. Soon after, Kafka recalls Sashiro's warning that if he kept up his current pace, he would be dismissed in 3 months. Sashiro acknowledges that he has been listening to Kafka talk about Mina when he encounters Kafka by himself. Then Kafka declares that Mina will be his opponent of choice. But Sashiro admits to Kafka that he too is determined to hold on to his position. Sashiro tells Kafka that this will be his first task as a kaiju bursts into the house late at night. The newly chosen Defense Force members are on the bus going to the monster's location, and as they board and get ready for their first mission, Sashiro reminds them of their responsibility. Kikoru makes reference to what Kafka had shared with her regarding his monster form at a nearby restaurant as they are seated across from one another. Despite her horror, Kikoru agreed to keep Kafka's monster identity a secret because doing so would subject him to a rigorous investigation and risk losing his new employment. Kikoru assures Kafka, however, that she will ensure his death if he were to cause harm to others. Kafka so consents to Kikoru's demands. Soon, Kafka's nervousness causes her to look at him and realize she must stop thinking. Lino and Kafka examine the creature they are supposed to kill at the base and are astounded by its size. Sashiro alerts the newcomers to the monster's whereabouts and assigns them the duty of destroying it. With this, he also makes it known that Mina is in charge of another squad that will deal with the base monster, leaving the newcomers to focus on the after monsters rather than the more serious danger. He bids them farewell and they go away. After that, Lino expresses his support for his friend by having one final conversation with Kafka about his eagerness to begin the mission. After that, Kikoru surpasses Kafka by a wide margin. Sashiro waits for the rookies to impress him after sending them on their task. Kafka begins to use force in the E district after remarking that he feels unusually calm for such a threat to be headed his way. Despite his persistence, the kaiju ignore Kafka and Kikoru chastises him for being overly forgiving. One of the elder members notices this and is already worn out at the thought of caring for the newcomers. He then orders them to form up for the attack. The senior member is taken aback when Kikoru shoots the kaiju while positioned on a roof, because he didn't anticipate a rookie to have such strength. Kafka commends Kikoru for her accomplishment and is equally as impressed. Ikaruga leads his squad in an attack at the Ikaruga battalion while commending 𝐂𝐻𝐻eru for a job well done. 𝐂𝐻𝐻eru then turns to Lino, hoping to impress him, but he can see that Lino has done much more harm than he has. Lino, despite this, isn't arrogant and tells 𝐂𝐻𝐻eru about the bullet trait he used to make the kaiju's motions less noticeable. Lino isn't happy with himself, though, because he doesn't think he's strong enough to stop Kafka from changing. She is pleased with the advancement made by her own group in the Nakanashima platoon, because she can see that Haruichi and Ai were doing a lot of damage on their own. Nakanashima observes the interaction between the two and describes them with strong adjectives while considering formally including them in her battalion. When Kafka returns to the E district and witnesses his friends fighting, he realizes that he is merely being a bother, but he is adamant about continuing. The other members of the defensive troop are perplexed by what he is doing as he dissects the creatures and discovers the base of the neck as a vulnerable area for attackers to target. His battalion leader congratulates Kafka on his discovery after he tells Sashiro about it. Kafka is thrilled at the prospect of continuing to have opportunities to fight alongside Mina in the future. He is pleased that he was able to be of some use. However, Sashiro urges Kafka to make room for Mina's cannon as she fires, interrupting his train of thinking. When Mina shoots the kaiju, she uses 96% of her force, which results in significant damage. Kafka is shocked to see the sizable hole she makes in the kaiju. Mina fires a 4th round to continue the assault, and a 5th shot puts an end to it. Kafka is even more awed by how amazing Mina's attack appears in person as opposed to just on television. However, Sashiro enters and asks Kafka if he feels demotivated after seeing the enormous strength disparity between him and Mina and knowing that he would have to become as powerful as her for Kafka to fight by her side. Sashiro humbly declines Kafka's slightly enraged question about whether he possessed such strength. Despite this, he makes an effort to justify his response and acknowledges that while he does better against medium-sized kaiju, his release force for firing weaponry is rather low for larger adversaries. He says this without even turning to check behind him as he quickly slashes a crawling kaiju. He then discloses that his family is descended from a clan of skilled swordsmen, and that, as vice captain of the defense force, he receives specialized weaponry that is tailored to each member's needs. He instructs Kafka to take care of the numerous after beasts that are produced after a basic monster is killed as he closes their chat. In order to slightly terrify them, he doesn't just tell Kafka this and then give the rookies the command to defeat the after beasts. Some senior members of the Nakanashima squad make fun of Haruichi and AI because they appear intimidated, but Nakanashima inspires them to continue. Since this is their first mission, Akinogi saw that the rookies were pretty worn out while watching the platoons, but Sashiro sees this as a chance for them to grow. Although Kikoru has already made significant progress, he believes Lino has potential as well. On Lino and Aiharu's side of the argument, Aiharu actually wonders why, despite his intensive training, he keeps losing against Lino. Lino is confused as to why the disposal crew member is there as he starts moaning about how the monster's organs keep getting destroyed. As they get ready for work, some members of the disposal crew try to catch a glimpse of Lino and Kafka at work. However, they are interrupted by another crew member who is curious about the whereabouts of one member, and Toku surmises that he is probably hiding in the restroom once more. He is proven wrong, though, as this team member appears and begins looking over the vanquished Kaijus without Lino or Aiharu knowing. He then discloses his strategy for wearing down the defense force by using versions that split and regenerate. Lino tries to follow what the masked Kaiju is saying, but Aiharu quickly cuts him off and confronts him. The Kaiju strikes him with a finger that resembles a gun without becoming scared, narrowly missing Aiharu's heart. Lino tries to reassure Aiharu as he falls to the ground hurt. The Kaiju changes back into his normal form as this is happening, and the two remember him from their entrance exam when he defeated Kikoru. Lino tries to alert the officers when the Kaiju orders himself to take a living troop member back with him, but the attempts fail because the Kaiju has already cut off the link. He succeeds in breaking Lino's leg during his subsequent attack. The Kaiju is still dissatisfied in spite of this. As this is happening, Lino recalls what the Kikoru stated regarding the Kaiju's finger that resembles a gun, surprising the Kaiju who didn't anticipate anyone knowing about it. Lino orders Aiharu to flee in order to alert the more seasoned member as the Kaiju continues to shoot. Aiharu, however, is obstinate and declines Lino's offer of protection. Lino rushes him out of the Kaiju's firing range before he has a chance to say anything further. Aiharu finally agrees after this and departs. Lino acknowledges his fear, but he reminds himself that he wants to join the army and be a soldier willing to sacrifice himself for his comrades. As a result, he starts making preparations for an assault. Lino realizes that even Kikoru was defeated by him as he battles the Kaiju. He would try to gain time for Aiharu to capture the top officers despite believing he was no match for the Kaiju. Lino quickly dodges the Kaiju's attacks while attempting to shoot it. Aiharu can still feel that Lino had improved much from the day before, despite the fact that he cannot watch the action. However, he soon has his thoughts disturbed when he almost takes a blow from an attack, which still slows him down. Aiharu becomes alarmed at this point. In a recent flashback, Sashiro is explaining to the rookies that only a select handful can surpass this wall in their stage of training because their range of release force is only about 20–30%. Aiharu just thought about being stronger after that day. In spite of this, Lino still comfortably outperformed Aiharu, which is something he admits. Rewinding to the present, Lino is still battling the Kaiju. The Kaiju changes into a larger and more powerful version of itself, suggesting that it had simply been warming up all along. When Aiharu notices Lino being attacked, he intervenes to push his friend away, injuring him in the process rather than Lino. Aiharu then understands that, rather than Lino, it has been him who hasn't been happy with himself. Out loud, he reveals to Lino that Aiharu was planning to defend himself despite his wounds. Aiharu then affirms that he warned the higher officers in advance by sending out a flare. When the Kaiju notices their tenacity, he reminds the two that their obstinacy is worthless, because nothing can exit the walls he has set up without his permission. Aiharu reassures Lino that the only way to stop the Kaiju is to just kill them, and they both race to do this. Aiharu uses an electric bullet during their assault and makes a reference to a time in the past when Lino himself had experimented with various bullets. Despite this, the monster strikes again, and Aiharu, who is accustomed to dodging its blows, orders Lino to fire from behind. His strike appears to be successful, but it turns out that the Kaiju was shielded by a wall constructed of monster corpses. The Kaiju mocks the two newcomers after undergoing another strengthening metamorphosis, and is sure of its victory. Sashiro is told about the humanoid Kaiju and that Lino and Aiharu haven't responded to any communications where the Hashina platoon is. Kafka notices one of the Kaiju corpses moving not far away, but before he can react, Kikoru surmises that the Kaiju they battled is returning. Concerned for his friend, Aiharu calls out Lino's name as he sees him lying on the ground hurt. Lino understands that his injuries are severe, but he pushes himself to continue fighting. The humanoid kaiju shows its irritation at Lino's ability to move and gets ready to put an end to him. 𝐂𝐻𝐻 tries to protect his comrade, but the kaiju blocks him because it is accustomed to his strikes. Lino is unable to defend himself from the kaiju as it fires from his finger gun while he is on the ground. 𝐂𝐻𝐻 makes an effort to stand up and tells himself that Lino might someday hold the rank of captain, but he wasn't going to allow Lino surpass him. 𝐂𝐻𝐻 tries to fire, but his gun doesn't discharge a bullet, and the kaiju just ignores him. 𝐂𝐻𝐻 then crouches in desperation, hoping someone will come to Lino's aid. When the kaiju hears this, it laughs at 𝐂𝐻𝐻, but Kafka arrives from behind it and punches it in the face. Kafka apologizes for being late and checks on Lino after the kaiju's face is destroyed. Instead, Lino accuses himself of being weak for allowing Kafka to change again. Kaiju no. 9 recognizes Kafka as Kaiju no. 8 as he regenerates. As soon as Kafka assumes his kaiju form, the Kaiju no. 9 recognizes him as the rumored Kaiju no. 8 wounded Lino down. Despite being aware of Kafka's immense power as a kaiju, Lino is nonetheless concerned, even though he discloses that he still wants to utilize Kafka's body as one of his pawns due to his immense power. The humanoid kaiju is perplexed as to why the author is helping mankind. As a kaiju, he then shoots Kafka twice in the chest after saying this. Lino is surprised to see Kafka bleeding because he did not anticipate Kafka to sustain injuries in his kaiju form. The kaiju, who does not appear to be intimidated, builds even more horrifying weapons from his corpse. 𝐂𝐻𝐻 observes this and understands he had only been warming up against him and Lino. Lino is alarmed by Kafka's outrage, which is the opposite of his usual fear. The kaiju had been firing such things into Lino and 𝐂𝐻𝐻's bodies. The humanoid kaiju does not react as Kafka charges forward and lets out an extraordinarily loud roar. Despite this, the kaiju is bewildered, which enables Kafka to strike him again. The kaiju attempts to deflect the blows by ejecting a wall of dead bodies to buy himself some time to resurrect, but Kafka destroys the wall before he can. The kaiju, realizing that Kafka has the upper hand, determines that he should withdraw, but he is prevented from doing so by Kafka's numerous attacks. Then Kafka strikes the kaiju's center. He is not killed, but he is rendered immobile as a result. Kafka, who is anticipating triumph, is about to complete the conflict when the defensive force shows up and is ready to assault him while he is still in his kaiju form. Just before 𝐂𝐻𝐻 and Lino are saved by Kafka. When Kafka explains to 𝐂𝐻𝐻 how serious he believes the situation to be and leaves the place they are in for her to handle, she changes her mind about what she had initially thought. A little while later, 𝐂𝐻𝐻 learns that Platonic Haruga has discovered a humanoid creature, which informs 𝐂𝐻𝐻 that Kafka has been located. From Kaiju no. 9's perspective, Kafka is to be thanked for the defending force's interruption, which allowed Kaiju no. 9 to find a gap in the defense. He promises to kill Kafka the next time they cross paths before fleeing. Kafka tries to stop the kaiju from escaping by approaching them while ignoring the members of the defensive force, but he is quickly shot. The kaiju departs after inflicting this damage. When Kafka himself is able to flee and is in a quiet alley, he believes he is safe. It turns out that Sashiro locates him and draws his blades before alerting the other troopers to the discovery of Kaiju no. 8. Kafka is attacked by Sashiro before he can respond. Although his blows don't do much, they are frequent and swift, making Kafka helpless to fend them off. Kafka recalls Sashiro telling him that he was used to fighting tiny creatures like him during a brief lull in the onslaught and knows that he wasn't playing a ruse. Kafka notices that Sashiro isn't the same enthusiastic person among his co-workers or while he's fighting monsters as he begins to use his 92% unleashed force. Kafka thinks of ways to block Sashiro's strikes as he prepares to attack. He dismisses attacking him right away, but shortly after, Sashiro cuts open Kafka's chest, interrupting his train of thought. Then, Kafka understands that he cannot overcome Sashiro by being timid and recalls that the defense force's suits are organic weapons created by incorporating pieces of slain kaiju. This indicates that the suit produces greater power the higher the released force is. When he first observed 𝐂𝐻𝐻's motions, Kafka confesses that he initially felt it was silly, but when he encountered Sashiro's inhumane skills, he realized he had been mistaken. Thought to have avoided one of Sashiro's blows, Kafka briefly lowers a guard before being startled by an apparent unseen slash attack that slashes off his hand. Kafka then understands that trying to regenerate would be energy intensive and that it would be better for him to try to attack. While struggling himself, Sashiro refers to Kafka as a giant monster due to his immense strength. Sashiro acknowledges to himself that he feels a tiny bit uneasy but quickly brushes it off. Then, facing Kafka, Sashiro chooses to utilize an attack comprised of a cross of invisible blades that enables him to execute a third blow in the event that the first one misses. Sashiro believes he is now one step closer to beating the kaiju, but Kafka refuses to let the blade leave his body, which causes him to get anxious. Sashiro dodges the punch that Kafka was about to throw at him. As the dawn rises, Kafka flees, leaving 𝐂𝐸hiro disappointed but not ashamed to admit his mistake to the defense force. Sitting on vanquished 𝐂𝐤𝐲𝐫𝐢, Kakeru comes to terms with the fact that she was wrong to distrust Kafka's ability to keep his kaiju form a secret. She still feels grateful to see him in spite of everything. Kakeru acts as though she wasn't worried when Kafka apologizes for worrying her, but she catches him before he hits the ground. Sheepishly, Kakeru tells Kafka that she will be able to kill the kaiju that defeated her the next time, no matter how many times she apologizes for allowing him to escape. Kafka gets ready to depart to check on Iharu and Lino, but Kakeru reassures him that the defending force was stronger than he had anticipated. Not far away, Mina asks 𝐂𝐸hiro about the power of Kaiju no 𝐸 after remarking that it is rare for him to be depressed. He explains that the kaiju had the strength of a Daikeiju after making a mocking attempt to photograph 𝐂𝐸hiro, and 𝐂𝐸hiro tells her of his statements that he had humanoid qualities in his demeanor. 𝐂𝐸hiro is reminded of this by Mina, who swears to wipe out all monsters, regardless of their identity. Ikaruga then tells 𝐂𝐸hiro about Kaiju no 𝐸's changes into a person. Later, as a group of monster sweepers are watching the news, 𝐂𝐸hiro stops by to see them. While watching the news in the hospital, Lino learns that Kaiju no 𝐸, also known as Kafka, is the most recent monster to have a code name. Lino thanks Kafka for saving him and Iharu when he sees him standing next to him. Then, Iharu surprises them both by inquiring as to why Lino is expressing gratitude to Kafka. Kakeru devises the justification that he assisted them in learning about the monster's organs in an effort to conceal Kafka's identity. Iharu is still in awe of Kaiju no 𝐸's immense power but wonders why it had assisted them. Lino feels relieved by Iharu's naivety as Kafka once more comes dangerously close to revealing his kaiju identity. Shortly after, the Defense Force rookies planned a surprise party for Lino and Iharu to celebrate their mission and welcome them back. Kafka is surprised by the Defense Course cook in turn with a 6-course meal. According to Haruichi, he requested the most basic course but received special treatment because the cooks were impressed with his father's business. Then 𝐂𝐸hiro enters the space and greets the rookies with happy birthday wishes. Lino compliments 𝐂𝐸hiro for letting his coworkers organize the event while enjoying themselves, but 𝐂𝐸hiro merely smiles smugly. When the rookies try to boast about their own skills after that, a fight breaks out. Lino learns that others are also encouraging themselves to become stronger even while there is conflict. Due to his discoveries with the 𝐂𝐤𝐲𝐫𝐢 core, 𝐂𝐸hiro then breaks up the combat and elevates Kafka to the 3rd Defensive Force unit. Kafka promises to give his utmost in battle as Mina officially adds him to the defensive force. Mina informs Kafka that he isn't even close to fighting by her side as he leaves the room. But, rather than being unhappy, Kafka is inspired to work even harder. However, he is told to perform 50 push-ups before leaving because he addressed her by her first name. Additionally, Mina informs Kafka that 𝐂𝐸hiro was the one who suggested Kafka be given a promotion. Kafka is studying in what appears to be the main hall when he hears someone working out nearby. When he arrives to find out who it is, he discovers 𝐂𝐸hiro practicing as though he will face Kaiju no 𝐸 once more. When 𝐂𝐸hiro eventually falls to the ground in awe, Kafka is seen watching him practice for the first time. When Kafka hesitantly inquires about his preparation, 𝐂𝐸hiro appears focused on defeating Kaiju no 𝐸 the following time they cross paths. Kafka is incredibly frightened within due to 𝐂𝐸hiro's ominous vibe. Then, 𝐂𝐸hiro swears to slay the kaiju. Kafka is amazed by 𝐂𝐸hiro's desire to defend the troop members despite the fact that he had just been indirectly threatened. Kafka promises 𝐂𝐸hiro that he will do his best because he knows that the man has great expectations of him in an effort to appear as though he has advanced. Then 𝐂𝐸hiro chastises him in jest. 𝐂𝐸hiro maintains 1% of his trust in Kafka despite this. At Takakawa Base, Kaiju no 𝐸 is perched 8,000 meters in the air on top of a flying kaiju, maybe planning his next attack. 𝐂𝐸hiro is pondering the human-like characteristics of Kaiju nos 𝐸 and 9 as well as the general state of 𝐂𝐤𝐲𝐫𝐢. Kafka is keen to improve his training so that he may live up to 𝐂𝐸hiro's demands. But as he makes his way back to the dorms, a meteor shower blankets the entire city and awakens the Defense Force personnel. 𝐂𝐸hiro asks Konomi where the situation is in the midst of his panic. She makes the speculative claim that the region has been infiltrated by 𝐂𝐤𝐲𝐫𝐢, who are all base monster leveled. Her prediction is confirmed when one of the monsters launches an attack similar to a cannon out of its mouth. 𝐂𝐸hiro then gives the order for all night guards to report for duty and speculates that since there have been no reports of base damage, the base may be the 𝐂𝐤𝐲𝐫𝐢's intended target. Not far away, Kafka notices that the base is engulfed in flames and can spot a kaiju that looks like a pterosaur. Kafka talks to 𝐂𝐸hiro about how many 𝐂𝐤𝐲𝐫𝐢s there are and how they are all solitary. 𝐂𝐸hiro is persuaded by this evidence that a strong commander is responsible for the attack as another humanoid kaiju materializes in front of him. Then Sashiro warns Kafka to call him back so he can cope with the approaching kaiju. As soon as Sashiro Hashina sees Kaiju no 10, he knows that he is the leader of the attacking kaiju. He asks Sashiro about the toughest opponent he may face right away, surprising him. Sashiro comes to the conclusion that since Mina, the commander, wasn't present, he would have to fight him. After selecting his target, the humanoid kaiju unleashes a massive force from his hand, which Sashiro barely manages to avoid. At this point, Konomi has finished determining the monster's class and has concluded that it is a giant monster. When Sashiro learns of this, he approaches Ikaruga and gives him the task of managing the after beasts. Kaiju no 10 uses this opportunity to strike Sashiro while the vice captain summons Ikaruga. He can easily avoid it though, and he swears to slay the kaiju. Sashiro soon observes the after beasts beginning to respond, which supports his suspicions that they had been aiming for the base. Sashiro dodges yet another strike from the kaiju and reminds himself to keep away from them, because being struck by one may be fatal. He considers the kaiju's skin to be even harder to cut through than no 8's. Ikaruga is seen to have executed Sashiro's orders on the east side of the base when he orders his soldiers to fire, but they fail to inflict any damage. Lino calls Kafka at the moment he rushes to put on his suit on his own. Haruichi and AI launch an assault from their side. The amount of force that Haruichi has unleashed is revealed to be 36%, but he is unable to use it before another kaiju appears next to him. Haruichi is frightened by how the two kaijus are collaborating as he sees them attacking. Kikoru uses a huge axe to smash through the kaijus to calm her coworkers' fears. Due to the unusually high number of powerful kaijus that year, Mina and Sashiro notified Kikoru before the kaiju raid that she would be receiving her own customized weapon. The axe's only drawback for Kikoru on the battlefield is that it strikes her as being overly harsh. Despite this, she is still able to show off more of her skills thanks to the weapon's ability to hit the enemy and then send a shockwave its way. Lino scoffs at how the weapon fit Kikoru like a glove because of her savage and destructive nature as he watches her launch another strike at the kaiju. Sashiro discovers that the kaiju relishes combat as he continues to avoid assaults. After briefly deflecting more strikes, Sashiro the kaiju remarks that Sashiro is fortunate to have survived this long despite facing him. Sashiro apologizes to Konomi for taking so long to prepare after nearly being struck, then initiates his 92% unleashed force. Before Kafka saves Akari, she is ready to be assaulted by a kaiju. Minas is appreciative of what he did and pleased that he can use it effectively now, which makes Kafka sheepishly proud. However, before any more can be exchanged, the kaiju that Kafka had slightly aided returns to the tech. However, this time, Kikoru quickly dispatches it with her axe. Kikoru tells Minas and Kafka that Lino and she will be in charge of baiting the kaiju while they should tend to the injured as Lino also arrives. Prior to leaving, Lino cautions Kafka about being careless. Soon later, Konomi reassures Kafka by saying that Nakanashima and Abina platoon have finally reached the base. More soldiers and platoons also join the battle to support those who are already engaged. Before departing with Minas, Kafka observes that everyone put in just as much, if not more, effort to advance as far as they did. Sashiro Hashina, on the opposing side, swears to defeat the kaiju no 10 once more and chops off parts of his hand and shell. The kaiju initially views this as simply silly, but is immediately disabused of this notion as Sashiro makes another cut through his body, demonstrating that the previous blows were merely ambushes. The kaiju enjoys fighting Sashiro despite his wounds and danger because he believes that a fight should be an exchange of blows with a foe of like strength. The kaiju is then slashed by Sashiro in a series of quick attacks, but it keeps regenerating. Kafka can sense that Sashiro Hashina is in difficulty even though he is unaware of his precise location. He is really right because the kaiju Sashiro is fighting, Kaiju no 10, is growing larger after being chopped several times. Sashiro feels relieved that he carried an ultra-high temperature steam capsule as this is taking place. The kaiju is unharmed despite this, leading Konomi to believe that he has a resilience of 9.0. Even though it appears that he is losing, Sashiro keeps avoiding the kaiju's assaults despite it being stronger than before and succeeds in getting on top of him. Sashiro speculates that his blades would never penetrate all the way, alluding to his dislike of confronting bigger kaijus. Sashiro realizes that if he uses his suit under the same circumstances, his life may be an even greater risk when his suit overheats just as he is about to attack. Sashiro determines he will just have to kill the kaiju in a hurry after hearing this. But when Sashiro also discovers after beasts and the kaiju self-destructs, his problems only get worse. A heavy punch is also delivered by the big kaiju as it emerges from behind Sashiro as he prepares to attack from behind. When Konomi sees Sashiro on the ground, presumably defeated, she begins to lose hope. The chapter opens with a flashback from Sashiro Hashina's background when his desire to join the defense force was severely dashed due to his fighting style. Rewinding to the present, 𝐂𝐸𝐠𝐻𝐲𝐫𝐢𝐠𝐡𝐭 cries out Sashiro name in a futile attempt to find life. Sashiro assures her that he is still alive despite his current condition and is enthusiastic about things, when Sashiro is told that the citizen has been evacuated and he is struggling to stand up. He swears to complete his duty to the very end. Despite his attempts, Kaiju no Ten just makes fun of Sashiro for trying it all because he doesn't think his feeble swords have any power. Sashiro does not respond, but he is aware that despite what he has been told his entire life, his swords are not as helpful as larger weapons. In a different flashback, both his father and a former co-worker advise him to leave the military. He was greatly inspired by Mina Ashiro since she didn't discount his strength just because he practiced sword fighting. Rather, she desired his might at her side so that she could easily clear paths for her to shoot adversaries. Back in the present, Sashiro is still fighting rashly and employing practically all 6 of his forms. Despite his best efforts, the kaiju still has little trouble capturing him. Kafka jumps to Sashiro's rescue on his side of the situation. Kafka apologizes to Lino Ikegawa and transforms even though he remembers Lino Ikegawa, instructing him not to. Lino is strongly opposed to this, but before Kafka can join the fight, Sashiro just chuckles and puts a stop to the explosion, claiming that he was merely clearing the way for Mina to unleash. Mina enters with her tiger, Bako, and cannon prepared with a 96% unleashed force. All of the squad members are comforted by Mina's promise to destroy Kaiju no Ten, who previously severely hurt Sashiro. Despite his best efforts, Mina's cannon easily dispatches the second humanoid kaiju. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Mina orders Bako to attack. However, Mina fires more ferocious shots at the kaiju first. As he observes the incident, 𝐂𝐸𝐠𝐲𝐫𝐢𝐠𝐡𝐭 is astounded by how well the kaiju is fighting the vice commander. With 63% of his unleashed force, Sashiro strikes out once more, remarking that he might be able to establish a gap due to the kaiju's reduced mobility. When Sashiro learns he lacks sufficient output power, 𝐾𝐈𝐒𝐿 arrives to assist him. Sashiro exhorts her to carry on fighting even though she lacks the strength to cause any damage, but soon later she collapses from heat exhaustion. Sashiro doesn't hold her responsible and carries on attacking. He is inspired to keep striking as he does so because he is reminded of Mina's advice to make an opening in the ground. After a brief interval, Mina compliments Sashiro for being such a great teammate and launches her cannon to deliver the decisive hit. Mina Ashiro's attack is successful in neutralizing the giant form of Kaiju no Ten. In the immediate aftermath, Mina assigns Sashiro Hoshina and Kikoru Shinomiya to rest. After the battle, however, it is quickly revealed that Kaiju no Ten had a final attack, a large after-beast bomb, that once detonated would have enough force to wipe out the base and most of the remaining officers. Seeing the dire situation, Kafka Hibino immediately races to a higher ground, revealing himself as Kaiju no Eight to Mina and Hoshina and prepares an attack to save the base. Stunned by the revelation that Kafka Hibino is in fact Kaiju no Eight, Sashiro, Hoshina, and Mina Ashiro watch as Kafka charges his body and uses all of his strength to launch himself towards the after-beast bomb in the air. The resulting force shatters the ground around Kafka, knocking Hoshina and Kikoru Shinomiya to the ground. Once close enough to the after-beast bomb, Kafka unleashes a punch so strong, it fractures the bone-like mask on his face and is implied to have shattered the bones all through his arms and legs from the force released. Kafka's attack proved effective enough to move the bomb farther from the ground and gave the defense force on the ground enough time to fully activate their shields. Despite the damaged state of his body, Kafka's Kaiju no Eight form is able to take the force of the explosion from the ground without flinching. After recovering from the explosion, Mina approaches Kafka and informs him that they will be taking him, Kaiju no Eight, into custody, and that's how the first part of this manhwa ends. Well guys, if you like this video and you want a second part, comment below with the word monster. Also subscribe to the channel, hit the bell and like the video, but most important, leave a comment. Until the next video.